Well, I don't think the entire newsroom does that because there are women and things, but I think that newsroom culture is by and large a masculine dominated environment. That you see examples of that in terms of the people who make the front page and in terms of stories, the men that dominate. So newsroom environments are male dominated environments, and that's because the men are often the bosses. That's not to say there aren't some fantastic female journalists who create, who equally can influence the news agenda, but that by and large, the dominant voice in the newsroom is the male voice. That sets the agenda of how things are reported. It sets the agenda of what things are reported, what stories make the news. And it also sets the agenda of how newspapers are, how the audience of newspapers are viewed. So if you were to look at the famous example of The Sun, how do they view their reader? Well, they view their reader as the average white van man. That's their perception of their reader. So all of the news is written with that audience member in mind. So the tone of it, what's included in it, the number of women you might put in the newspaper in a bikini, are all judged because your audience is viewed as masculine too. So it's the dominance of masculinity over the news of this country is an epidemic even in the way that journalism is framed and discussed. So you have all these discussions of objectivity and fact-based journalism and balance, as if emotion and having an opinion are not as valuable to the news agenda. Well, I would argue that's a masculine perspective of news. I would say that human beings make stories. Now, that might be viewed by some as that's because I'm a woman. I would say that that's not because I'm a woman, that isn't a binary opposite. It's because the news industry has been dominated by men to such an extent that these kind of masculine words set the phrases and set the system of professionalism. And we need to have an honest and open conversation about whether things like objectivity and bias are always either accurate descriptions of what happens in the media or necessary. There would have to be some massive cultural changes to journalism as a profession for there to be any real form of gender equality in it. And that would be both pragmatic and cultural. So we'd have to make some changes in terms of the way that women are supported to have families. Things like being able to have creche facilities in newsrooms. We'd have to, the general route to management in news organisations is that you work as some form of reporter first. So how do you balance working as a reporter where you have to go where the story sends you and when it sends you? So if there is a massive story at 3:00 in the morning that you're going to go, what are you going to do with your children? What if you're a single mother? How are you going to, how would you be able to go on that story? So we have to think about routes of progression, routes of support for women in newsrooms, but we also need to think about how we portray women in newspapers and, not to have so many women who are only portrayed as victims or mothers or sex objects and have more women who are portrayed as truly equal.